Finally tonight, fixing a date for the U.S. and its allies to end combat operations in Afghanistan. That question is front and center again after Defense Secretary Leon Panetta talked to reporters yesterday en route to a meeting with his NATO counterparts. From the White House to the NATO summit, the question today was, will the U.S. end its combat role in Afghanistan early? U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta seemed to suggest exactly that yesterday when he said, quote, hopefully by mid to the latter part of 2013, we'll be able to make a transition from a combat role to a training, advise, and assist role. That would be 1 year earlier than expected. But this afternoon, White House spokesman Jay Carney tried to clarify.
What Secretary Panetta said is that it could happen that the transition to Afghan security lead could be moved up to 2013, but he was not making an announcement about a decision that had been made.
In fact, NATO has been working to transition to full Afghan security, province by province, by the end of 2014. It was widely assumed that coalition troops would lead military operations until then. But even before Panetta's statement, French President Nicolas Sarkozy signaled an accelerated transition. He hosted Afghan President Hamid Karzai in Paris last week.
Pour la France, la poursuite de la transition.
For France, the continuation of this transition and the gradual handover of the combat responsibilities will allow us to plan the return of all the French forces by the end of 2013.
In Brussels today, NATO defense chiefs were at pains to show unity on an Afghan timetable. British Defense Secretary Philip Hammond.
We are, I think, all actually in the same place. We all recognize that in 2013 there will be an evolution of the mission.
And NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen played down any suggestion of a rush to the exits.
We expect the last provinces to be handed over to the Afghan security forces by mid-2013. And from that time, the role of our troops will gradually change from combat to support. In that, there is nothing new.
But there was consternation in Kabul. A senior Afghan security official warned that Panetta's statement, quote, throws out the whole transition plan. Back in the U.S., Republicans in Congress and on the campaign trail were equally bothered. Presidential hopeful Mitt Romney spoke in Las Vegas yesterday.
So the Taliban hears it, the Pakistanis hear it, the Afghan leaders hear it. Why in the world do you go to the people that you're fighting with and tell them the day you're pulling out your troops? It makes absolutely no sense.
Even so, CIA Director David Petraeus, who once commanded NATO forces in Afghanistan, counseled calm at a congressional hearing today.
The conversation that Secretary Panetta had with some press on his plane was more than a bit overanalyzed, shall we say.
All of this comes at a sensitive time in a war that has seen almost 1,900 American troops killed. President Obama pointed to progress in his State of the Union address last month.
From this position of strength, we've begun to wind down the war in Afghanistan.
But a recently leaked national intelligence estimate spoke of a stalemate on the ground, and it warned Afghan forces might not be able to keep control once U.S. forces depart. For more, we get two views. Retired Army General Jack Keane was Army Vice Chief of Staff when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan in 2001. He now has his own consulting firm. And Celeste Ward Gaventer was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in 2006 and 2007. She's now at the University of Texas in Austin. We thank you both for being with us. General Keane, to you first. You just came back, I should say, from a trip to Afghanistan. What do you think it would mean if the U.S. and NATO were to accelerate this handover of security from NATO to Afghan forces early?
Well, we're not ready to do that, frankly. What has happened in the south and southwest, which is Kandahar province and Helmand province, we have made significant gains, and we're solidifying those gains. I mean, in my judgment, the Taliban have been handed a stunning defeat there. Secondly, now in the east, for the first time, the momentum has shifted to our favor. And that is where we need to apply these additional resources that we currently have. And we need all of the 2013 fighting season to continue that momentum, but most importantly, to solidify those gains. So I think that while it's possible we could finish that task earlier, I think it's highly unlikely.
Celeste Ward-Governor, how do you see, what would it mean if the transition were to happen a year earlier?
Well, Judy, thank you so much for having me on, and I have a great respect for General Keane and his service to our nation, but I respectfully disagree with him on this. I think we need to step back and ask the question, fighting season to fight for what? And who are we fighting and to what end? And I think the administration has still not satisfactorily answered that question. It's not clear who our enemy is, or what another fighting season, or 2 more fighting seasons, or 10 more fighting seasons is really going to achieve at the expense of American lives and treasure.
What about that? What does another fighting season or more, as she just put it, accomplish?
Well, I mean, we're still asking a basic question, why are we in Afghanistan? I thought that question had been answered for the American people after the 9/11 attack. We're attempting to stabilize that country so the Taliban do not return to power and we don't have to deal with a sanctuary again, which we would most likely have to deal with if they were permitted to return to power. So that is what we are preventing from occurring. And just as the surge made significant difference in Iraq through 2 fighting seasons, 2007 and 2008, we brought the level of violence down 90% and was within the Iraqi security forces' capability of handling. While these countries are very different, the principles are absolutely the same. We're trying to bring the level of violence down with the Taliban to put it within the means of the Afghan National Security Forces to handle. We have done that in 2 major areas, and we need 1 other area to do that in RC East.
Why isn't that a sufficient explanation, Celeste Ward-Governor?
Well, Judy, I think we need to consider that 9/11 was over 10 years ago. The principal architect and organization responsible for the attack on the United States is gone. And it's what's happening in Afghanistan now has far less to do with 9/11 than it has to do with regional rivalries being played out on the stage of Afghanistan, which has happened many times in the history of Afghanistan. And the United States is right in the middle of it. And we need to start looking at what our fundamental strategic interests are. And if it is to prevent a sanctuary for terrorism, there's many ways to do that other than occupying Afghanistan in perpetuity. There's no real evidence that even if the Taliban were to come back into power, that there would be nothing we could do to prevent it becoming a sanctuary again. And the 9/11 argument, I think, frankly, even with the American public, is growing a bit stale, even if you look at polls and the way that the American public is viewing this war now.
How do you respond to that? And again, you've been talking to the military leaders over there. Why did they believe that staying a little bit longer is going to make a difference?
Because it clearly does. Force has a quality all of its own. Killing and defeating Taliban and driving them out of the country is a military objective that you can define that objective and you can define the results. And for the life of me, I mean, after we came to Afghanistan in 2001, we changed that regime out in addition to with the Northern Alliance tribes. I don't know how you walk away from the 30 million people and just turn them back into the Taliban and 7th century Talibanism with the fanatical, brutal regime that they were. I mean, it seems to me that America, in terms of its character and its values, does have some obligation to those people after we made that regime change.
But under that argument, you would argue for staying indefinitely then?
Oh no! What I'm arguing for is staying to a point where the Afghan security forces can begin to deal with this situation on their own, and that's all we've been interested. We're not an occupation force, and the only reason this thing is 10 years long is because we had an administration that prioritized Iraq over Afghanistan beginning in 2002, and this place was on a diet in terms of resources until 2010.
Celeste Ward-Governor, if you could respond to that, and also this national intelligence estimate that we mentioned in the report a minute ago. It's been leaked to a news organization. It's essentially painting a more pessimistic picture than what the administration has been saying.
Well, Judy, the NIE is discouraging but not terribly surprising. I think we need to keep in mind that this is their country, and we are primarily fighting Afghans whose country we are in. And, you know, we may have a moral obligation to people around the world to prevent atrocities and prevent terrible things from happening to them. But if that's the fundamental driver of American strategy in this world, we're going to be awfully busy, because there are lots of other terrible places where terrible things happen. We also have a moral obligation to the people of the United States, their tax dollars. And I know General Keane would agree with me that we have a moral obligation to our all-volunteer force and the tens of thousands of military families who've been experiencing nonstop deployments for over a decade now. And so strategy is all about balancing priorities and about figuring out what's important to you and managing risk. And there are no great solutions here, but what we're doing doesn't seem to be resulting in anything terribly good for the United States.
How do you respond?
Well, I certainly agree with the purpose and the strategy of stabilizing in Afghanistan. I think it will contribute to regional stability to a certain degree. I would agree with Celeste that overall we have not had a very good regional strategy, and that still persists to this day. But for the life of me, I don't see a destabilized Afghanistan with the Taliban in control as being anything but horrific for the region in terms of the rise of radical Islam, what it would portend for Pakistan in terms of their future destabilization with a growing nuclear arsenal and an already raging insurgency inside that country. It would just add to that problem. So I think we've got to look at it in terms of what is the impact on Pakistan, and certainly what are our obligations to protect our own people from this place when we know for a fact that the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda are collaborating today as we speak, and clearly would reunify their efforts.
Just quick final word from you, Celeste Ward-Gaventer, and do you believe the administration is going to accelerate this departure timetable?
Well, I think they well might, and I would advise them, in fact, to do that, because the reality is it's not free to continue the course that we're on. We always have to choose between not a perfect course and the other course that we're on, or some other desirable course. We have to take what we're doing into account and other alternatives. And I think what we're doing has stopped making sense a long time ago.
Celeste Ward-Gaventer, General Jack Keane, we thank you both.
Good seeing you.
Thank you so much.